Tell me about a time you improved a process introduction. This is a common behavioral interview question for software developers, backend developers, full-stack developers, senior developers, and team leads. Interviewers ask this question to understand whether you notice inefficiencies, whether you take initiative to improve team workflow, how you reduce repeated problems, how you improve quality, speed, or reliability, how you work with developers, QA, product owners, and DevOps, how you introduce change without disrupting the team, your own assigned task. This question is especially important for Java developers, backend developers, Spring Boot developers, full-stack developers, senior software developers, team leads, Agile teams, DevOps teams. The best way to answer this question is by using the STAR method. STAR means S, situation, explain the background. T, task, explain your responsibility. A, action, explain what you personally did. R, result, explain the final outcome. A good interview answer usually spends 10% situation, 10% task, 60% action, 20% result. The most important part is the action section because interviewers want to understand how you identified the process problem, proposed an improvement, got alignment, implemented it, and measured the result. Question: tell me about a time you improved a process. Example 1. Improving the API development process. In one team, backend APIs were often implemented before frontend and QA fully understood the request and response structure. This caused repeated questions during integration and sometimes led to field name mismatches, unclear error handling, and late changes during QA. Task: I wanted to improve the API development process so backend, frontend, and QA could align earlier. Action: I reviewed the repeated issues from previous API stories. Common problems included unclear request parameters, missing sample responses, inconsistent error format, unclear pagination behavior, front-end, back-end field name mismatch, QA not knowing all edge cases. I proposed adding an API contract review step before implementation started. The review included C endpoint URL, C HTTP method, C request parameters, C required and optional fields, C response DTO, C pagination metadata, C sorting behavior, C validation errors, C authorization rules, C sample request and response JSON. I discussed the idea with developers, QA, and the product owner. Then I created a simple API checklist and added it to the story template. For new API stories, we reviewed the contract during refinement or early development. I also used open API documentation, so the contract was easy to share. Result: front-end integration became smoother. QA could prepare test cases earlier. The team had fewer late changes caused by unclear API behavior. The process helped reduce rework and improved delivery confidence. Why this answer works? This answer is strong because it shows API process improvement, front-end, back-end alignment, QA collaboration, documentation, reduced rework, practical team improvement. Example 2. Improving code review process situation. In one project, pull requests were often large and difficult to review. Some PRs included feature logic, refactoring, cleanup, tests, and formatting changes all together. This slowed reviews and sometimes caused important feedback to be missed. Task: I wanted to improve the code review process, so reviews became faster, clearer, and more effective. Action: I first discussed the issue during a team retrospective. I explained that large pull requests created problems such as longer review time, harder understanding of business changes, unrelated cleanup hiding important logic, more back-and-forth comments, delayed merging, higher regression risk. I suggested a few practical improvements. The team agreed to keep PRs smaller when possible, Separate cleanup from feature work. Include a clear PR description. List impacted APIs or services. Mention test coverage. Add screenshots or sample requests when useful. Identify risky areas for reviewers. I created a simple PR template. The template included summary, reason for change, technical changes, testing completed, impacted areas, rollback notes if needed, reviewer focus areas. I also started using this format in my own PRs first. Result: reviews became easier and faster. Reviewers gave more focused feedback. The team reduced confusion around large changes and improved code review quality. Why this answer works? This answer is good because it shows process improvement, team retrospective participation, code review maturity, communication improvement, quality improvement, leading by example. Example 3. Improving QA handoff process situation. In one team, developers often marked stories ready for QA without enough test notes. QA had to ask follow-up questions about test data, edge cases, expected errors, and impacted areas. This slowed testing and sometimes caused missed scenarios. Task: I wanted to improve the QA handoff process so QA could test features more efficiently and accurately. Action: I reviewed the types of questions QA commonly asked after development. They usually needed test user information, test data setup, happy path scenario, edge cases, validation rules, expected error messages, impacted APIs, role-based scenarios, environment details, known limitations. I proposed adding a QA handoff section to each story before moving it to QA. The handoff included feature summary, how to test, test data, API endpoint or UI screen, happy path, negative scenarios, role-based scenarios, regression areas, known limitations, deployment version. I shared the format with QA and asked for feedback. QA suggested adding expected status codes and error response examples for backend stories. I added that to the template. Result: QA had clearer information before testing started. Testing became faster and more focused. The number of repeated clarification questions decreased. The team also found defects earlier because edge cases were listed more clearly. Why this answer works? This answer is strong because it shows check QA collaboration, check test readiness improvement, check developer to QA handoff, check reduced repeated questions, check better test coverage, check team efficiency. Example 4. Improving deployment readiness process situation. In one release, a feature failed in QA because a required environment variable was missing. The code was correct, but the environment configuration was not confirmed before deployment. This showed that our deployment readiness process had a gap. Task: I wanted to improve the process so environment and release issues could be caught before deployment. Action: I reviewed the deployment failure and identified what information was missing before release. The missing checks included required environment variables, external service URLs, feature flags, database scripts, smoke test steps, rollback instructions, monitoring dashboard, support contacts. I created a deployment readiness checklist. The checklist included code merged, PR approved, database changes reviewed, environment variables confirmed, secrets or config keys confirmed, feature flags configured, QA completed, smoke tests defined, rollback plan documented, monitoring ready, post-deployment owner assigned. I reviewed the checklist with DevOps, QA, and the release manager. We used it for the next release. During that release, the checklist caught a missing configuration before production deployment. Result: the deployment process became more reliable. The team avoided a production configuration issue. The checklist became a reusable process for future releases. Why this answer works? This answer is good because it shows checklist, deployment process improvement, checklist, DevOps collaboration, checklist creation, production readiness, risk reduction, prevention mindset. Example 5. Improving production support process situation. In one application, production support issues were sometimes escalated to developers with limited information. Developers had to spend time asking for logs, correlation IDs, affected users, timestamps, and screenshots. This slowed investigation. Task. I wanted to improve the production support intake process so developers could troubleshoot faster. Action. I reviewed past production support tickets and identified missing information. Common missing details included: correct timestamp, affected user or account, endpoint or screen, error message, correlation ID, browser or environment, request payload pattern, screenshots, steps to reproduce, business impact, frequency of issue. I proposed a production issue intake template. The template asked support teams to include: check issue summary, check affected users, exact time range, check steps to reproduce, correlation ID, screenshot or error message, check business impact, check urgency, check environment, recent changes if known. I also documented how to find a correlation ID from logs or UI error messages. Then I reviewed the template with support, QA, and developers. Result: production issues came to developers with better information. Root cause investigation became faster. The team reduced back-and-forth communication during incidents. Why this answer works? This answer is strong because it shows: click production support improvement, click troubleshooting efficiency, click cross-team communication, click incident process thinking, click observability awareness, click reducing resolution time. Example 6. Improving local setup and onboarding process situation. New developers often took a long time to set up the application locally. The setup required Java, Maven, Docker, database configuration, environment variables, and dependent services. The steps were spread across different documents and old chat messages. Task. I wanted to improve the onboarding process and reduce repeated setup questions. Action. I went through the setup process from a clean environment and documented each step. The guide included: search, required Java version, Maven setup, Docker setup, database startup, environment variables, application configuration, dependent services, startup order, test data setup, health check URLs, common errors, troubleshooting steps. I included exact commands where useful. I also added a verification step after each major section. For example, confirm database connection, confirm service health endpoint, confirm local API response, confirm logs are clean. Then, I asked a newer developer to follow the guide. When they found unclear steps, I updated the documentation. I added an owner and last reviewed date so the document could stay current. Result: new developers could run the application faster. Senior developers received fewer repeated setup questions. The onboarding process became smoother and more consistent. Why this answer works? This answer is good because it shows: check onboarding process improvement, check documentation, check developer productivity, check testing documentation with real user, check long-term maintainability, check team efficiency. Example 7. Improving regression testing process for shared code situation. In one project, a change to shared validation logic caused a regression in an older API. The new feature worked correctly, but one existing flow behaved differently after the shared component was refactored. Task. I wanted to improve the process for testing changes that touched shared code. Action. I reviewed the issue and identified the process gap. The team had tested the new feature, but we had not fully identified all existing flows that used the shared validation logic. I proposed an impact analysis step for shared code changes. Before modifying shared code, developers would check all usages of the shared component, impacted APIs, older behavior expectations, existing test coverage, missing regression tests, QA regression areas, backward compatibility risks. I created a small checklist for shared code pull requests. The checklist included: list impacted services or APIs, list changed behavior, confirm backward compatibility, add or update unit tests, identify QA regression scenarios, mention risk in PR description. I also worked with QA to create focused regression test scenarios for shared validation changes. Result: the team became more careful when changing shared components. Regression coverage improved. Future shared code changes had clearer impact analysis and fewer surprises during QA. Why this answer works? This answer is strong because it shows learning from regression, shared code process improvement, impact analysis, QA collaboration, backward compatibility awareness, prevention mindset. Example 8. Improving requirement refinement process situation. In one team, stories sometimes entered development with unclear acceptance criteria. Developers had to clarify requirements during implementation, which created delays and rework. This was especially common for APIs, reports, authorization rules, and edge cases. Task: I wanted to improve the requirement refinement process so stories were clearer before development started. Action: I reviewed several stories that caused rework and identified common missing details. The missing details included CUC, user role behavior, required and optional fields, validation rules, error messages, empty result behavior, date and time zone rules, business calculation rules, external dependency assumptions, QA test data, non-functional requirements. I suggested adding a clarification checklist during backlog refinement. For backend stories, the checklist included: who is the user? What is the expected behavior? What are the edge cases? What should happen on invalid input? What rules are allowed? What data should be included or excluded? What should QA test? Are there performance or security concerns? I used this checklist in refinement meetings and encouraged other developers to add questions. Result: stories became clearer before development. The team reduced rework caused by missed requirements. QA had better acceptance criteria, and estimates became more accurate. Why this answer works? This answer is good because it shows XBay requirement process improvement, Agile refinement, reducing ambiguity, better estimation, QA alignment, proactive communication. Best short answer version. If you need a short interview answer, you can say, in one team, developers often marked stories ready for QA without enough test notes. QA had to ask repeated questions about test data, edge cases, validation rules, expected errors, role-based scenarios, and impacted areas. I noticed this was slowing testing, so I proposed adding a QA handoff section to each story before moving it to QA. The handoff included a feature summary, how to test data, happy path scenarios, negative scenarios, role-based scenarios, expected status codes, error responses, regression areas, known limitations, and deployment version. I reviewed the template with QA and added their feedback. Then I started using it for my own stories and encouraged the team to use it for similar backend work. As a result, QA had clearer information before testing started. Repeated clarification questions decreased, and testing became faster and more focused. Common mistakes to avoid. 1. Choosing a process that had no real impact. Bad answer: I changed the way I named files. Better answer: I improved the QA handoff process, which reduced repeated questions and made testing faster. 2. Forcing a process without team input. Bad answer: I created a process and told everyone to follow it. Better answer: I proposed the process, got feedback from QA and developers, and adjusted it before using it. 3. Making the process too heavy. Bad answer: I added many mandatory steps for every small change. Better answer: I created a lightweight checklist that was useful for stories with testing or release risk. 4. No measurement or result. Bad answer: the process was better. Better answer: QA had fewer clarification questions, reviews became faster, and deployment issues decreased. 5. Only improving your own work. Bad answer: I improved how I worked personally. Better answer. I started with my own work, then shared the improvement so the team could benefit. Best practices for answering this question. Use the STAR method. Choose a real process problem. Explain why the old process was inefficient. Show how you identified the root cause. Involve the right people. Keep the improvement practical. Start small. Get feedback. Show measurable or clear impact. Explain how the process became repeatable. What interviewers are looking for. Interviewers want to see whether you can identify inefficiencies, improve team workflow, communicate change clearly, collaborate with others, reduce rework, improve quality, create repeatable practices, think beyond individual tickets. For senior roles, they also want to see process leadership, cross-team influence, operational maturity, delivery improvement, risk reduction, mentoring through better practices, continuous improvement mindset. Strong words to use in your answer. You can use words like improved, standardized, streamlined, reduced rework, created a checklist, introduced a template, aligned, clarified, documented, measured, reduced confusion, improved handoff, increased consistency, made repeatable. Example: I improved the QA handoff process by introducing a lightweight checklist that included test data, edge cases, expected errors, role scenarios, and regression areas, which reduced repeated questions and made testing more efficient. Good process improvement topics you can use. Depending on your experience, you can talk about API contract review process, code review template, QA handoff process, deployment readiness checklist, production support intake template, local setup and onboarding guide, shared code regression checklist, requirement refinement checklist, release checklist, incident documentation process, pull request, size guideline, test data preparation process, monitoring and alerting review, documentation review process, sprint demo preparation process. Final summary. Tell me about a time you improved a process is an important interview question because strong developers improve not only code, but also how the team works. The best answer should include what process was inefficient, why it caused problems, what improvement you proposed, who you involved, how you implemented it, how you got feedback, what result improved. Good examples include cover API contract review, cover code review process, cover QA handoff process, cover deployment readiness checklist, cover production support intake template, cover onboarding guide, cover regression checklist, cover requirement refinement checklist. The strongest answers show initiative, collaboration, practical judgment, measurable improvement, and continuous improvement mindset.